The unofficial election campaign is off and running. The Prime Minister travelling to Melbourne today to sell his electric vehicles policy, and he's defended accusing the former Labor leader Bill Shorten of trying to end the weekend with his approach to EVs at the last election. Joining me now is Graham Morris and Bruce Hawker. I'll tell you what, for political tragics like us, Bruce, 7-month campaign, exactly what you're after.
I'm not sure if it's what the public should have inflicted on them, to be quite honest with you, but there you go. Look, I don't think this thing is really going to ramp up any time before the end of the Christmas, New Year period. That's my sense of it. There will be some positioning and so forth, but people aren't going to really feel like they're in a campaign until sometime after Christmas.
Graham, your thoughts? Because it seems to me that this has all the trappings already of the campaign. Yesterday in the Hunter, today the Prime Minister's making spring rolls in Cedar Chisholm in eastern Melbourne.
And yesterday you saw that it worked. Why do you do these things? Well, do you try and drag the candidate onto the front page? And the lady solicitor in Patterson is in all the media today because she was with the Prime Minister yesterday. But when you think about it, the Prime Minister has been overseas, he's been locked up in Parliament, then he's been locked up at the lodge in quarantine. And he's a bit like me. He likes, and Bruce for that matter, he loves campaigning, but he hasn't been able to. So all of a sudden, he's back from Glasgow and he's not locked up in the lodge and he can go and do his work in the electorate. And it is really important for the candidate and it's good for him.
The contrast with when he was on the world stage, Graham, was, to me, very stark. He looked like he was back in his comfort zone. You say he loves campaigning. He looked like he was feeling more comfortable in that environment. Because he copped it over there, let's be frank.
Well, also he knew he was on safe ground because he knew the Russians and the Chinese were never going to go anywhere. And everyone sort of had to come back to roughly where the Prime Minister was, and that was put the common sense hat on, do something for the climate, but let's not kill our country. Well, we'll be.
Bruce, what's your thinking on this climate issue now? The Prime Minister pivoting on the EVs. He says he's never been against electric vehicles, but certainly the tone, at the very least, if not the facts, were pretty clear last time, weren't they?
Yeah, look, I think that's a real stretch for most people. They remember the war on the weekend. He said that Labor was waging because they wanted to have electric vehicle policies that, he wouldn't be able to pull the caravan to where he wanted to go for the weekend to go fishing and shooting and hunting or whatever he wanted to do. And that became quite a potent element in the 2019 campaign. So I don't think he can just walk away from that without attracting a fair degree of criticism. And, of course, when you look at the policy itself, it doesn't really do much. It doesn't provide any great incentives for the importation of these electric cars. It's not like you have in the United States and the UK and elsewhere where you actually have very real incentives for people to purchase them. And of course, it contrasts with Labor, who do have a policy to encourage people to purchase electric vehicles. So I think he's still got a bit of an eye on that section of the community that might be a bit suspicious of electric vehicles and what that might mean for them. And this has been his problem all along. He comes under pressure over climate change from people in the inner city Liberal electorates like
Is this a reverse, Bruce? Is it a reverse of the last election where Shorten was being wedged in that sense with one of the most ham-fisted things I've seen in politics over 20 years at Adani Convoy, which backfired massively, and yet he was trying to communicate to two different groups as well. Is this the Liberal experience of that?
Well, it is. It's exactly that problem. Whereas Labor struggles these days and has real fights on its hand in the inner city Labor electorates, previously very strong Labor electorates. For Morrison, it's the reverse. He has the people who are socially progressive and very concerned about the environment, but probably fiscally quite conservative in areas like Wentworth, as you say, Higgins and Kooyong and so on, very concerned about these issues. And we know from polling that I've seen myself that this is a huge vote-changing issue for people who would normally be expected to vote Conservative in those electorates. So he's got a two-front war that he has to fight. He has to deal with those electorates and still deal with those people out there in more conservative areas, traditionally more sceptical about climate change and
Graham,
electric cars.
But just on the electric vehicles,
But
I think
let me pick up on something Bruce said, and then you can go on to talk about the electric vehicles. But Andrew Hurst and Andrew Clennell, my colleague, reminded us of this today. Andrew Hurst told the powers that be in the Liberal Party after 2019, don't think that climate's not an issue. Don't take this as a fact that people don't care about it. They do. We've got to take it seriously. So all the way back from the wash-up of that election review with Andrew Hurst, as you know, a very astute political thinker.
I agree.
He warned them, you've got to deal with it.
Well, that's right. But for many people, it's not number one. Yes, it's there and it's in the top 7 or 8.
Higgins, Wentworth, North Sydney, those seats, it would be number one.
They're important. And, when you're talking about 4 or 5%, then the environmental stuff is important. But if we go into the election campaign, the coalition, and everyone's just thinking about the environment, that would be terrible. No. Because there's a million other things.
Of course there are. That's the problem.
Shut up,
that
Bruce,
is the problem.
You go.
Sorry, mate.
The electric vehicle thing, point, though, I think, proves the Prime Minister's point, that technology changes. During the last election campaign, most of the car makers were still, on normal sort of cars. I think there was Volvo and somebody else, and everyone says, oh, look at Norway. God, you could drive from Canberra to Wagga and you'd run into the sea in Norway. So it's sort of a different ballgame. But the technology changed, the thinking has changed, and the Prime Minister has changed. Well, so he should.
Well, but the problem is though that he goes into the electorate having to say one thing to the people in Wentworth and Higgins and Kooyong and elsewhere, and one thing to people in regional electorates and so forth. And the media scrum that's following is not going to be in the dark about this. They're going to see him saying one thing to one group, another to another, and that's where it becomes difficult.
He's not.
Well, he is saying that, Graham.
No, he's not.
With great respect, he is exactly saying those sorts of things. He had to kowtow to the National Party in which was a really unedifying exercise of weakness on his part, waiting for them to give some sort of tick to his leader, to having any sort of a policy for Glasgow, and then he turns around and does something which is pathetic, really, on electric vehicles, and expects that he's going to get some kudos for that.
Okay.
It's all these double standards that keep coming into play, all these conflicting messages.